Welcome back. We're just taking you live to New Delhi now, where Air Force One has just landed in India, and it looks like the president may be getting off the plane any minute now. Of course, President Biden is in India for a gathering of the G20 nations, and India hosting this year. And in fact, President Biden will be having a dinner with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It's an interesting gathering of nations this year, where we have several with both competing and, overlapping interests. India versus China. India increasingly trying to offer itself up as an alternative to businesses, an alternative to China. Of course, there continues to be the U.S. versus China and Russia versus the U.S. Two of those nations, though, Russia and China, are not going to be at the G20 summit. Xi Jinping choosing not to be in attendance, but he is sending his second in command. It's interesting because he was in attendance at the BRICS nations gathering in South Africa. So this is seen as a little bit of maybe a statement being made that he was not willing to make it to the G20 summit. And of course, Vladimir Putin also not present at the summit at all. I think we have Ed O'Keefe, who is traveling alongside the president, though he got to India a little bit earlier than the president. There you go, being on time. Ed, so can we talk a little bit about the focus for President Biden at this G20 summit?
Anne-Marie, good to be with you here as we wait for the president to deplane, as they say here in New Delhi. A nice breezy evening here for him, not as warm as it was earlier, and certainly not as warm as it is back home right now. This summit is designed to do several things. First of all, its focus, remember, is on economic issues, because this is a gathering of the world's largest economies. And so there'll be a lot of talk about global development, climate change, women's rights, infrastructure, which of course is a big focus for the president, not only at home, but around the world. He's expected to announce a few $100 million more for infrastructure funds and for other sort of soft power programs that are designed to continue U.S. influence across the world. But this is also an opportunity for the president to reinforce his allyship with, his focus on the importance of India when it comes to not only economic affairs, but world affairs generally. India, remember, perhaps in the most urgent issue facing the world, is officially neutral on the war in Ukraine. So the president would like to keep India at least neutral, if not supportive of Ukraine in that war. And then India, like many other countries here in South Asia, Southeast Asia, is increasingly concerned about what China is up to as it continues to try to exert its dominance, whether it's provocations in the South China Sea and across the waterways, whether it's releasing a new map in recent days that sort of suggests what it believes to be its territories, even though it takes away from regions of India and the Philippines and Vietnam and other parts of this region. They're concerned about that. And with China's President Xi Jinping not being here, with Russia's President Vladimir Putin staying away as well, it in essence gives Joe Biden and Narendra Modi the world stage to themselves. And will allow them to perhaps shape at least this organization and its focus in the coming years in a far more Western-centric way.
And of course, India, a part of the Quad group of nations, known as the Quad group of nations, including Australia, Japan, and the U.S. And this is kind of a cooperative group that was kind of formed to limit to a certain degree, or to combat China's expansion kind of in the region, to work cooperatively. But let me ask you this. You said that with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping not being there, it's giving President Biden and Narendra Modi, Prime Minister, an opportunity to sort of have more leeway, if you will. But I wonder if it also weakens this G20 summit as well.
That is a concern, certainly, of some participants and observers, that if you can't get China, the second largest economy here, if you can't get Russia, who isn't a top five, but certainly is still a factor, even as it's been isolated in the midst of its war, then is it really a body that is worthy of so much attention and concern? It would argue that it is. The Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen was here earlier speaking with reporters and suggested it has been essential to economic cooperation and coordination, both the G20, the World Bank, and other entities like that. But, this meeting comes at a time, you mentioned, for example, BRICS, that group of sort of other emerging economies, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, that's now added Saudi Arabia, Iran, and some other countries that are emerging economies. That the fact that China participated in those meetings and isn't coming here is seen, at least by much of the world, as a signal that he'd prefer to deal with those economies that are perhaps more open to Chinese influence or investment than those that are in the G20, like most of Europe, Argentina, and other major countries in the West. And so that'll raise questions about how effective this organization can be. Next year it's set to meet in Brazil, and then in 2020, it's going to meet in Brazil, and then in the United States and in South Africa in the coming years. So it gives you a sense of where this organization meets and sort of its global scope. But there will be questions, especially too, if they can't come out of these meetings, Anne-Marie, with some sense of common purpose or some kind of mission statement,
Right.
which is always something that has to be negotiated carefully amongst all the members.
Yeah, and you mentioned Xi Jinping wanting to connect more, work more with members of the BRICS nation, these emerging economies. This is one of the things that President Biden has on his agenda to try and combat. There's been a lot of sort of economic diplomacy taking place with China around the world for a number of years now. And President Biden has talked about the need to beef up the World Bank, of course, the U.S., a big investor in the World Bank, in order to sort of combat China's expansion and provide these developing nations with the finances they need to continue to develop.
Yes, and to that, and you'll hear a lot of that this weekend, conversation about more U.S. investment, making sure that it remains a bank that not only is propping up emerging economies, but making sure there's also investment in women-owned firms. The climate change is a factor in the investment and whatnot as well. We are still waiting here for the president to get off the plane. Part of the delay may be that I think they got here a little earlier than expected. So there's supposed to be a formal welcoming ceremony here led by the Indian government, and then he will head to a meeting with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is ubiquitous across India right now for the preparations that have been made. I've been struck, Anne-Marie, you walk down street corners here in New Delhi, even in parts hours away from here that we were able to get to, and there are posters touting this meeting this weekend, expressing Modi's goals for it, and often featuring his face. And there's some controversy around that because, of course, he's potentially facing another round of elections next year. And so there's a thought that he's, in essence, exploiting the timing of this meeting to his domestic political advantage by taking advantage of the signage, declaring this 3-day holiday here in New Delhi that will make it look to the world like this is a somewhat cleaner, less chaotic city than it normally is, because its 33 million residents are mostly off the streets. But then he has people like President Biden visiting him for the first time since Mr. Biden took office. He'll be meeting with the leaders of Canada and France and other countries that are coming as well. All of it making him look like a real global superstar and a player at a time when this organization is set to meet. So we'll watch for the body language, and we'll watch to see what, if anything, comes out of the meetings between the president and the prime minister. We'll also watch, frankly, Anne-Marie, to see if we can actually get any moving images out of those meetings. There have been real restrictions placed on us in the press in our ability to be with the president tonight, tomorrow when he's at this G20 meeting, because the Indians have been severely restricting press access, even the number of staff members that will be allowed to be with the president on site at this conference. Why that is, why they haven't been more accommodating, at least to the president's staff, let alone the American and international press corps, remains to be seen. And the other thing going on here, Anne-Marie, you can appreciate this. There are a handful of Indian news stations. This, like the United States, is a country that consumes its news in heavy doses. And several of the channels here have been going wall to wall already for days in anticipation of the preparations for this. They've been interviewing the executive chefs of the hotels who are preparing meals for the leaders that are staying at the various hotels. They've been ticking through who's staying at which hotel in New Delhi, and now preparing for images like this as we see the president descend the stairs here and begin his official visit here in New Delhi. If we want to just take a look at this. One other thing I'd note there, Anne-Marie, you noticed the president came off the stairs. They're not wearing a mask. There has been a lot of discussion in recent days about how, if at all, he's going to adhere to COVID precautions, given that his wife was had tested positive earlier this week. She seems to have passed, and the president tested negative before leaving Washington yesterday. But they said he would continue to adhere to CDC guidelines. So does that mean he's going to be wearing a mask when meeting with Indian leaders and other leaders at the summit? Does it mean he's going to keep his distance? We'll see. But given that the First Lady's case appeared to have been mild and the president's tested negative, perhaps that won't be as much of a concern. He's expected to get into his limousine here and then head off to, again, a meeting with the Prime Minister. It is just after 7 o'clock local time. We're 9.5 hours ahead of the East Coast here in New Delhi. So after that meeting with the Prime Minister, he's likely to head for some downtime and some rest ahead of what's scheduled to be a full day of meetings tomorrow at a convention center that's been built here in New Delhi specifically for these meetings, a sign of how deeply committed India was to organizing as well organized a summit as possible.
Yeah, I read there was a bit of controversy actually about some of the new buildings and walls going up to kind of block the view, if you will, of some of the, more challenged neighborhoods in New Delhi that maybe don't make for some great pictures on TV.
Yeah, and it's as simple as when we got off the airplane and we're headed to our ride here at the airport, we couldn't help but notice and smell how freshly paved the roads were. I mean, they've really tried to do their level best at making this city look impressive and to spruce up a bit. That's not to say that New Delhi isn't a beautiful city and isn't one of the largest, most functioning metropolitan areas in the world, but they've clearly gussied up a bit ahead of this, knowing how important it is to put on a good face and how appearances matter to the domestic audience here and to Modi's government especially.
Yeah, definitely. And while we are sort of still watching the president as he makes his way into the vehicle, I should also talk to you about Vietnam. On Sunday, President Biden's going to will head to Vietnam, and that's also a crucial component of this overseas travel.
It is, and it's funny, Anne Marie, because we only got a sense that this second part of the trip was happening just a few weeks ago. The president revealed to donors at a fundraiser, a closed-door private fundraiser in Maine, of all places, that the Vietnamese leadership wanted him to come and meet with him about establishing a more formal strategic partnership with the United States that would put Vietnam's relationship with the United States on par with India, South Korea, and China. In essence, making it as serious an ally as it possibly could be at all levels. Biden is willing to make that visit and take that meeting because, of course, it helps advance his goals of counterbalancing whatever it is China is trying to do, not only in this region and around the world. That if one of its next door neighbors is eager to meet with the American president when he happens to be in the region, then let's take that meeting. And so Sunday he will fly from here in India to Hanoi for meetings with the Vietnamese leadership that night, scheduled to hold a press conference Sunday morning East Coast time to recap all of this. But both of these stops demonstrate, again, the Biden administration's push to focus the United States' foreign policy much more on this region, both because of its economic growth, its population growth, but also as a way of sending a signal to China that the United States is not ceding its potential economic and military dominance in this part of the world as it continues to take steps that have angered, at the least perturbed, many of its neighbors, including India, which has had border disputes with it, of course, for years, which is now seen as a big economic competitor, and Vietnam, which is interested in developing a closer economic and potentially military relationship with the United States in the years to come.
All right, Ed, thank you so much for jumping in front of the camera there as the president was emerging from Air Force One. Thanks. I know we'll be talking to you throughout the weekend. Thank you.